When we first moved into that old mansion, it felt like a dream come true. For years, my husband Mark and I had dreamed of a big house, a place we could call our own, a mansion even. It was everything we had imagined, or so it seemed. But little did we know, that beautiful house was hiding dark secrets, secrets that would haunt us forever. It all began a few months ago when Mark came home one evening, his eyes wide with excitement. "I found the perfect house," he said. "It's everything we've ever wanted. It's massive, it's got charm, it's old, and it's right on the edge of town." Mark worked in real estate, and his job had always involved searching for homes. But this one seemed different. He told me that his office had found a beautiful mansion on the outskirts of our town that was up for rent. A place with enough space for the kids, and perfect for the two of us. We'd always wanted to live in an old house with character, but we never thought we'd actually find one like this. The house itself was situated on a sprawling plot of land, surrounded by towering oaks and overgrown ivy. The moment I saw it, I was captivated. It looked like something straight out of a Gothic novel. Large stone walls, arched windows, and a tall wrought iron gate that led up to the front door. It had a charm about it that was impossible to ignore, despite the creaking floors and the dust that seemed to settle in the corners. When we moved in, the house seemed perfect. The children, Jake and Emily, loved it. They ran around from room to room, their laughter echoing through the halls. There were 5 spacious rooms, a grand staircase, and in the center of the house, a massive courtyard that was open to the sky. The garden outside was overgrown with plants, giving the place an almost magical, otherworldly feeling. But the most striking feature was the massive oak tree standing at the edge of the courtyard. Its gnarled branches twisted toward the sky, as if reaching out to something beyond our sight. That tree gave me a strange feeling, an unsettling sensation that I couldn't explain. I would often catch myself staring at it for long periods, unable to look away. There was something about it, something I couldn't put my finger on. Still, I tried to ignore it. After all, we had moved into our dream house. What could possibly go wrong? The first strange occurrence happened on our second day in the house. It was a bright and sunny morning, and the kids were outside playing. I was unpacking the kitchen when I felt a sudden cold breeze sweep through the house. I froze. It was as if the air itself had changed. I looked toward the open courtyard, but there was no sign of anything unusual. As I continued unpacking, I heard a loud scream from outside. I rushed to the door and saw Emily lying on the ground in the courtyard holding her ankle. Mark was already there, kneeling beside her, his face pale. "What happened?" I asked, rushing over. "Mom, I didn't do anything. Someone pushed me," Emily cried, tears streaming down her face. Mark and I exchanged a confused look. There was no one else in the courtyard. Emily's ankle was twisted, but there was no sign of an accident. She insisted that she hadn't tripped, but had felt a sudden shove from behind, as though someone had pushed her. I was stunned. I had felt something similar earlier that day, like a light pressure on my back, but I had dismissed it. But now, hearing Emily's words, I started to wonder, could this be the beginning of something more? I looked around the courtyard, but there was nothing there. The old oak tree loomed overhead, its branches swaying gently in the wind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was as if the house itself was alive, watching us, waiting. That night, I shared my concerns with Mark. I told him that I felt a strange energy in the house, something dark and unsettling. But Mark, ever the skeptic, laughed it off. "It's just an old house, Emma. You're overthinking it. We've got a beautiful place to live now. Let's enjoy it." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, something told me he was wrong. I wasn't overthinking it. Something was wrong with that house, and it was tied to the old oak tree. A few days later, as I was cleaning the house, I decided to explore some of the rooms that we hadn't yet touched. The house was enormous, and I hadn't had time to see everything. As I walked down a narrow hallway, I noticed a door at the end that I hadn't seen before. It was slightly ajar, as though inviting me in. I hesitated. Something about that door made my heart race. But curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed it open. Inside, the room was dark with only a small window letting in some light. It looked as though it hadn't been touched in years. The air was thick with dust and cobwebs clung to the walls. The room was filled with old furniture, an antique dresser, a table with intricate carvings, and several dusty chairs. But it was the mirror that caught my attention. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. Its frame was ornately carved, and the glass was cracked in places. But the reflection was clear. As I looked into it, I couldn't help but feel drawn to it. I reached out to touch the glass, but as my fingers brushed against it, a cold shiver ran down my spine. Suddenly, the mirror began to shake. I stumbled backward in surprise, my heart pounding in my chest. Before I could move, the large dresser nearby started to tilt, as though something was pushing it toward me. I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the thick silence of the room. The dresser crashed to the ground, and I felt a weight pressing down on me, as if the house itself was trying to crush me. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, like I was being held in place. I felt a hand grab my wrist, pulling me away from the fallen dresser. The next thing I knew, I was lying in my bed, Mark, the kids, and a doctor standing around me, all looking concerned. "Mom, you were in that room again, weren't you?" Jake said quietly, his voice shaking. Mark was furious. "What were you thinking, Emma? If that dresser had fallen any harder, you could have been seriously injured." The doctor examined me quickly, checking for injuries. "It's a miracle you didn't break anything. You're lucky," he said. I could hardly understand what had happened. I had been in that room, but who had pulled me away? Had it been Mark? But no, he hadn't been in the room with me. I was certain of that. That night, I tried to convince myself that it was just an accident, that I had been imagining things. But deep down, I knew something darker was at work here. The house was trying to take us piece by piece. As the days went by, strange things kept happening. The kids were acting strange. Jake, who had always been fearless, seemed to be avoiding the courtyard altogether. Emily, too, was quiet and withdrawn. I knew something was wrong, but no one would listen to me. Then one day, Lila, the helper Mark had hired, came to me with a strange story. She had been hanging clothes in the courtyard when she suddenly looked up at the oak tree. Her face had gone pale. She said that she saw a shadow, an unmistakable figure, standing in the branches, watching her. She couldn't explain it, but she swore the shadow was moving, shifting in the tree as if it had a life of its own. That tree. "It's not right," Lila said, her voice trembling. "It's like something is living in it. I'm telling you, something's wrong." I couldn't deny it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that every strange incident we had experienced had happened near that tree. It was as if the house itself was connected to it, feeding off the fear that the tree caused. That evening, I shared Lila's story with Mark. He was skeptical, of course, but there was a part of him that seemed to hesitate. The next day, he brought in a man from town, a tree specialist, to prune the oak. He assured me that the tree was just old and that a little trimming would do it good. But when I saw the man at work, I felt a sudden panic rise in my chest. "No, don't touch it," I yelled, running toward him. "You can't cut the tree, it's dangerous." Mark tried to calm me down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible would happen if they cut the tree. It had already taken too much from us. As I watched the man continue his work, I turned away, unable to watch anymore. The following night, I came home late after a visit to the hospital. The front gate was wide open, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I quickly stepped inside, but what I saw made my blood run cold. Jake was standing in the courtyard, staring up at the oak tree, his eyes wide with terror. "Jake, what's wrong?" I called out, rushing toward him. But when I reached him, I froze. There, hanging from one of the branches, was Emily. She was struggling to keep her grip. Without thinking, I grabbed a nearby chair, placed it under her, hoping to catch her when she fell. She tumbled down, landing hard on the chair. I rushed to her side, and when I looked up again, I saw the shadow in the tree moving, twisting, as though it was alive. "Mom, Someone pushed me, Emily said, her voice weak. I was just climbing the tree and someone pushed me. That was it. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The house was evil and the oak tree was at its heart. Something dark, something ancient was living in that tree, and it had set its sights on my family. That night, I packed our things. We couldn't stay in that house anymore. I couldn't risk the safety of my children. Mark at first tried to argue with me, but he could see the fear in my eyes. He knew I was right. We left the house behind, driving away into the night. As we passed through the gates, I looked back one last time. The oak tree stood tall in the distance, its branches swaying in the wind. It seemed peaceful, almost victorious. But I knew better. The house, the tree, the darkness that lived within it, they were all waiting for the next family to come. I could only hope that whoever they were, they would have the strength to escape before it was too late. And so, the mansion remains empty for now, its doors standing open, ready to welcome the next unsuspecting souls. The oak tree continues to stand, its roots buried deep in the earth, its branches stretching toward the sky, waiting for its next victim. Who will be next? Only time will tell.